Okay. Give me a figure out my ring. I did have a practice run at this, and there we go. Hopefully. Okay, turns out it was a lot easier to share my screen in practice. Can anyone see my screen?
Not
No,
yet.
we can't see it.
Okay, give me a sec to try that again. Things always work better in practice.
That's up now, Kristen.
Okay. So is that working now?
Yes, it's working now, Kristen. We've got your first slide up.
Okay, perfect. Let me just get it full screen, possibly. Technology is not my friend today, it would seem.
Your whole screen's gone now.
Okay, I think it should just be loading. Are we working?
Not yet.
Okay, are we back to the good at your end?
Okay, you're back on. We've got your first slide, your introduction slide up. And your second slide.
Perfect. And now if I go into my overview, perfect. Okay, I'm just going to go with it then, and hopefully this keeps working for me. Let me know if it cuts out at any point. So yeah, I've worked at Auckland Zoo for 13, 14 years now, and have worked with Porcupine throughout a lot of my time at the zoo. I've worked with multiple different personalities and groupings, so I'm just going to share some basic knowledge. I'm not claiming to be a complete expert. There is definitely a lot of things about Porcupine that I could still learn, but I've definitely learned some things over the years that hopefully will be useful to people that house Porcupine. I'm going to keep it pretty broad because I know that a lot of people on this have probably already got Porcupine and have their ways of doing things, so hopefully it'll just give some handy hints. Going to cover kind of lots of different things from breeding to diet to enrichment, and then a little bit of training before handing over to Dean. So we've currently got 29 Cape Porcupine in the region at 13 different facilities, at least we did when I wrote this PowerPoint about a month ago. They are considered least concern in the wild, and what I've found through all of my time working with Porcupine is there is very little quality husbandry information out there for a zoo setting. Most of it is quite outdated. Whenever we've tried to do research, there seems to be a lot of information from one individual who did it back in the 80s, and not too much up-to-date stuff out there that's entirely relevant. They are considered rodents and are considered to be an old world porcupine, which are our ground dwelling species and typically much larger. I don't know about you guys that house them, but I've worked with females up to about 21 kilograms, so they can get quite large. They are social, live in small family groups, and reportedly monogamous, and generally considered nocturnal and active from dawn to dusk. So I'll jump into the breeding side of things first. I have been fortunate enough to have worked with breeding porcupine a couple of times in my career. It's definitely been a highlight. I've found that introductions between the males and the females usually go pretty successfully. We have personally done this in kind of off-display habitats where we have a mesh dividing wall between them, just so that we can adequately observe anything, we actually let them in together, and then typically things have gone pretty smoothly from there. I found that it's always important to have space to make sure that you can separate if things go wrong. So our setup has kind of allowed us to be able to open up for them and shut off doors and slides if things did start going wrong quite quickly. I've often found that when doing introductions, there's kind of a period of activity, and then if things go well, they typically tend to just settle and go back to sleep. We're typically doing our introductions during the day, which is kind of usually the resting period. And if I can, I do tend to play it safe and kind of separate those first couple of nights just to make sure that everything is going good and that we can actually monitor those introductions quite closely. Matings are typically not observed. I have seen a couple when they've occurred directly after introductions, but outside of that, we haven't actually observed many matings at all that have led to our pregnancies. They have a relatively short gestation period, much like most of your carnivores out there. Typically give birth to twins, and the porcupets do grow quite quickly and are weaned by about 4 months of age. Now, ideally, I've always tried to do first health checks and microchipping in the first 4 weeks before they get too big for restraint. They are quite challenging little creatures to manually restrain, as you can kind of see how awkward it is there in those photos. But they do move incredibly quickly. Their quills usually have hardened by 4 weeks, so they are quite spiky little creatures by that point as well. And we've typically had to do microchips in the front shoulders, which I think is fairly normal for most people, just because that's the most easily accessible part of their body when you're trying to restrain a spiky little creature. Now, they are a species that does come with some management struggles. We do have some pairings that just don't seem to bond or reproduce. And if we work well together, then we will sometimes just accept them as a display group. Auckland Zoo currently has one of these pairs. They've been together for an extended period of time, over 5 years, and have never bred successfully despite changes in facilities, I believe, multiple times. And we actually suspect that our male's got some reproductive issues, given that he has previously been housed with multiple females with no successful breeding with either of them. And the other female that he was housed with has very successfully bred since being paired with him. So we're kind of one of those institutions that's housing a pair at this point, and we'll probably just continue to hold them as a non-breeding pair because they are pretty solid and do display well together. You can then also have the opposite problem, and some pairs do tend to bond too well, and being rodents, the numbers can escalate quite quickly. Contraceptives with porcupine seem to be fairly complicated. There's not really any longer term options that have proven successful, that I'm aware of at least. We have used an injection that's been short term, but that has lasted roughly 2 months before we then go back to probably having breeding porcupine again. Single sex groups can work, but often this is from splitting down family groups where the juveniles have known each other since birth. Unrelated single sex older individuals don't tend to pair so well. I'm sure there are some places out there that do manage this a bit more successfully, but we have typically found that it doesn't work so well. We did attempt an introduction between 2 males who were both relatively young but old enough to be on their own, and that didn't end well, and we ultimately ended up separating and sending them both on to other facilities for their own welfare. And then I guess the other biggest challenge to managing porcupine is that they are a nocturnal animal, so a large portion of their activity occurs when we're not around. So we really like to clarify the importance of having some kind of monitoring system, some kind of CCTV, to be able to actually assess what porcupine are up to when we're not around. For most of us keepers, we know that we're only around our animals for maybe 8 to 10 hours a day, and the rest of that 24-hour period, we don't necessarily know what they get up to, especially if we don't have camera systems. We definitely know that this is something that we need to work on and get improvements at our end. We do have individuals that we know have a few stereotypic behaviors, so we're just kind of problem solving how we can actually monitor that and get some more baseline data into maybe what triggers those at the moment. And then obviously, because they are nocturnal, you do need cameras that have good night vision, otherwise you're not going to see much at all. Moving on to diet. Typically, a wild diet of a porcupine consists of roots, tubers, barks, fallen fruit, cultivated crops, and sometimes they will gnaw on bones and consume insects. We typically have tried offering bones and have never had any success with our individuals, so it's not something that we really offer any longer. We tend to offer as the base diet a variety of root vegetables and leafy greens. There's definitely some varying palatability of those and some food preferences out there, but I kind of go with the theory that if they're hungry, they will eat the things that they need. We tend to use things like kumara, sweet potato, and sweet corn as favorites for training foods because those seem to be our highest value items. For our porcupine, we also have a keeper talk at 10 a.m. every morning. So those are typically the things that we use to get them up at that time of morning and make sure that they are nice and visible and doing things that we need them to be doing at that time. I've also had success with dried fruit like dates and sultanas and mixed nuts as high-value reinforcement items for training as well. Often some form of rodent pellet is offered as part of the diet just to make sure they are kind of nutritionally complete. We just use a generic rabbit pellet for our guys, and that seems to be working quite well and something that they eat with fairly good consistency, which is good. And then in these pictures that I've got on the slide, these are actually a drop feeder, an automatic kind of drop feeder that we use at Auckland Zoo, and have been using for probably 4 or 5 years now. And they've actually been really useful at just allowing us to deliver food to porcupine at different times in the night when they're active. We do find, especially kind of at this time of year when we've just changed over to our winter hours and we do have porcupine that are kind of expecting that we're going to put out the food a little bit earlier than we normally would in our summer hours so that we kind of finish them a bit earlier during the day. And there are some afternoons at the moment where they are very much getting up and will go and start eating that enrichment pretty much immediately, which would leave them not quite as much for during the night when they are most active. So we've been finding that these drop feeders are really good. We can program them for kind of a variety of times to drop food. And we tend to put them in places in the habitat where porcupine can't reach them. We've got a couple of sets of hooks on our back wall, and we have previously hung it from the tree in the middle of our habitat as well. And that can basically drop food at either 3, 6, 9, or I think it even goes up to 12 hours after we've kind of finished for the day, which is quite nice. Moving on to some enrichments. So this is just some of the things that we've done. Most of these ones have been for photo shoots for our marketing team to enable them to have good content to be able to share, since porcupine are a species that people don't necessarily always get to see when they're at the zoo. So stuff like boxes, non-toxic flowers, and whole food items, we do tend to use cardboard boxes and things quite regularly to present food. We've done things like leaf litter piles and hiding food in them, so they have to forage and dig through those. Sometimes, usually for my Christmas photo shoots, I will make the browse kind of species that we can use for them into wreaths and different kind of presentations of the browse. And then I've also had success with ice blocks as well. They don't tend to be too bothered by crunching through ice with their teeth, which is quite nice. And that just gives kind of a few more options for, I guess, delaying that kind of timing of them consuming food straight away. And either they have to crunch through or wait for the ice to melt, which seems to work quite well. This slide here, a bit more writing on it, but this is basically our current enrichment kind of suggestion chart that we have for our porcupine that we've got currently. We do have frequent use items that we would use kind of 2 or 3 times a week. And those would be things that we try and use daily. So that's like our cardboard boxes, cardboard tubes. We also are really fortunate that we can get thick cane bamboo, which is kind of like, I guess, 8 to 10 centimeter diameter. Really good for porcupine to have to kind of chew through and shred and to be able to get that food in the middle of it. And then we also bury their food items as well, sometimes in our substrate to encourage digging. So those are kind of the things that we would try and use kind of daily, some of those things, just to make sure that it's not just them waking up and foraging around and getting food. And we also find that that just deters any birds or anything getting to it before our porcupine wake up to get to those items. And then the other stuff in the chart on the left is just kind of all the different extra things that we use. So just trying to make sure that alongside kind of our frequent use items that we are giving them something a bit more novel daily where we can. Also things, few extra food snacks in there. We will occasionally give them a whole coconut, but we try and make sure that that is not more than once a month. And then just using different smells and that kind of thing, just to create variation in their habitat. The other thing that I'm going to highlight here is really the importance of browse for porcupine. I'm not quite sure what all the habitats in the region look like, but ours is a fairly basic habitat that does have one living tree in the middle of it, that we do have meshed off to deter porcupine from destroying. But as a result of that, we always make sure that we're giving them lots of deco browse and chew logs so that they can maintain their dental health that way. So we're always giving them kind of thicker, shorter chew logs, which they typically will just shred the bark off, and then we will take them out and replace them. And then usually once a week, we also try and make sure that we've got a big load of deco browse in there. So that's stuff that's a bit more leafier, larger pieces, ideally long lasting so the leaves don't fall off it immediately. And that's more to give shelter opportunities and kind of shade around the habitat. Sometimes we do find that those get stripped and they will kind of rip them up into lots of tiny pieces, but we still don't typically find that they consume the leaves, but it's still kind of enriching for them and gives them some options to do during their nighttime activity. We do also sporadically do kind of browse studies where we look at what species we offer. We try and get our browse team to source us kind of new species that we haven't tried before and offer those and see if there's any success, just so we can always be updating the list of species that we use and hopefully get a bit more variety in there for them. Right, working around porcupine. So they are obviously a relatively large animal. I personally absolutely love them, but I know that they can be quite intimidating for newer keepers who maybe haven't worked around them as much, and are just learning how to work around porcupine. So I guess reading behavior and remaining alert around them is incredibly important, as they are very much an animal that does have the potential for injury. I have experienced that firsthand myself. It's really important that we interpret behavior, but we don't use labels, and that we rather identify the actions. So rather than describing them as aggressive, we kind of talk about the actual particulars. So moving with their quills raised, stomping their feet, mock charging, that kind of thing. I have frequently worked with individuals who would have been labeled aggressive when they came to us, and have frequently tested keepers by flaring their quills, rattling, stomping, and we have had instances of charging, but most of them have actually been able to be conditioned to be quite polite around keepers once we've kind of established some boundaries, and gotten keepers confident working around them. We've found that the porcupine behavior has increased, and become a lot more polite. So I guess confidence is one of the most important tools I found when working around porcupine. We always like to ensure that our staff working porcupine have had adequate training with one of our more senior keepers so that they're confident and have the chance to ask any questions that they need to ask. We also have leg protection chaps available to us as well that we do encourage most of our younger staff to wear. And newer staff are also encouraged to take in a shovel with them as well, just so that they've got options to be able to create a barrier between them if they need to. That's not to be able to be used to push the porcupine away. It's just a matter of giving keepers the confidence to be able to hold their ground, because I have found that majority of the issues that we have working around porcupine come from people that back down if a porcupine starts charging towards them. Typically, I found that if you hold your ground and just remain calm, the porcupine will actually attempt a few things and then realize that the game's not working and will actually take themselves away, and the relationship will improve dramatically from there. They are an animal that does have an incredible ability to form relationships, and that those people that are more confident of working around them, and do put more time into them, will be able to do a lot of really amazing training things with them. The more time a person can put into porcupine, the more successful they'll be able to be and the more things they'll be able to achieve. We tend to prioritize training sessions in the morning for our porcupine, just because that is when they are the most active, and then we typically tend to let them sleep for most of the rest of the day, just so that they can actually get in a good solid sleep, and do their thing. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of basic training stuff, and then I'm going to pass over to Dean to kind of go through a lot more probably cooler stuff than what we do. So just basic conditioning to keep a presence can definitely lead to being able to do a lot of basic husbandry procedures that will just help out greatly with your porcupine management. So we weigh our porcupine once a week, not necessarily always in the crate as the picture on my screen suggests. Sometimes we will just set up the scales on the stones at the back of our habitat and just get weights off them by luring porcupine on, usually with their favourite treats. We do always have to be mindful of protecting the cord on our scales. We have had a few individuals who are notorious for attempting to eat scale cords. So always just making sure that we protect that and kind of set it up in the most successful kind of positioning to avoid that. Basic station training I've found is really good. So we typically do have kind of station stumps in our habitats where we can encourage them up to, and that can just lead into a lot of other behaviors like hand injection. It can ensure that we kind of get nice kind of calm default behavior. It can be a lot easier to hand feed individuals if they've got their station stumps, so you can actually target feed and get food into multiple porcupine if you've got them together. Crating we've always found is a really helpful tool. I definitely have been involved in a lot of kind of internal porcupine moves, whether or not it's been for introductions or if it's been because we've had to do habitat work. So personally, we've found that the large kind of mesh top dog crates like the one in the picture work really well if we're just doing internal moves and for general kind of desensitization for a porcupine to be shut into a crate. They're nice and open and inviting because they're quite spacious. So porcupines seem to be quite comfortable going into those quite quickly, which has been quite beneficial. They also fold down nicely for space saving in our service areas, and they're also incredibly lightweight. So if we've only got one keeper working porcupine, which is our typical kind of allocation, it means that they can actually lift the crate in themselves and do the session without having to worry about lifting a much heavier kind of transfer crate in there to be able to use. I found that even though they look fairly flimsy, they do actually hold up really well for internal moves. If I've got individuals that I think are going to test it a little bit more and potentially try and chew the bars, then I will add a few cable ties into the top corner to make sure that they hold their shape well. But that's typically worked quite well for us. And then things like nail trims and stuff are starting to get into kind of the more intense stuff. We typically don't have to do that with too many of our porcupine, but we have had a few individuals that haven't necessarily been into digging too much, and therefore we have had to just trim little bits off here and there. And again, that's something that I've kind of developed onwards from our stationing. Obviously in the picture there, it's our previous male who was incredibly relaxed and very tactile. So I did tend to be a lot more relaxed in where I would do trims with him. But for the most part, it would be kind of beginning that process on the station stump so that we could make sure we were nice and safe as well. And then for me, I'm just going to end on this slide. Taking a lot of inspiration from Emma Pierce at Hamilton Zoo. They've got an absolutely amazing training program with their porcupine. I don't know if many of you follow them, but they do walk their porcupine around the zoo. They've been able to walk their porcupine to the vet department for medical procedures. And I just think that this is a really cool slide of all the things that you can work towards with porcupine, and just really cool inspiration for anyone who has porcupine and wants to progress that training further. And that is me done.
Sorry, I was doing 3 things at once then. Thanks, Kristen. I really enjoyed that. I've got a question for you, if you don't mind, before Dean jumps in. So when you were talking about the breeding, how do you detect you have a pregnancy? That was my first question.
For us, it's typically been weight gain. I will admit we haven't necessarily always been onto it and recognizing this. We definitely have had a surprise litter that we weren't expecting.
Love a surprise.
Because they are an animal that doesn't typically show too much. But yeah, with females, we have often seen kind of a weight gain in kind of the last maybe 2 to 3 weeks before giving birth, and also sometimes just a change in behavior. We have seen kind of a female get slightly more aggressive towards another porcupine in the habitat, which was when we actually had 2 females and a male together. And then also seen females just suddenly become quite ravenous in those kind of final weeks before giving birth and just want to eat everything under the sun.
And my other question, it's not really a question. I really loved you talking about the safety and working in with those animals, because I guess being predominantly carnivore focused in my head, it's nice to know that you actually are training keepers on how to be in those spaces with these animals who are potentially dangerous.
Yeah, and I mean, as I say, I think I still probably remain the only person on my team that has actually been quilled by a porcupine. So for me, it's always been a really important part. Like, I found that our porcupine respond a lot better to keepers that are confident, and if that means that you're teaching them how to work around them and not be intimidated by a species that can be, as I said, 21 kilograms. I do frequently like to describe our porcupine in our encounters as kind of 20 kilos of sass and intimidation. And they definitely will use that with some individuals. So yeah, for me, making sure that people are confident working around them is probably the biggest thing I try and teach them when we're teaching new people how to work around porcupine.
And do you find that after your training with your newer staff, that as time progresses, if they're given an opportunity, that their confidence increases and that they're interested enough to then push those training regimes up a little bit more, start to come up with more training ideas and really embrace those animals?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think they're an animal that, I mean, they're kind of a slightly weird addition to our carnivore section, given they're not technically a carnivore. But we definitely do have some people that are passionate about working with them, which has been nice. Now that I'm in more of a senior position, I don't necessarily get to see porcupine as frequently as I would like. So it's really nice to be able to have some of those younger staff stepping into a position where I can kind of pawn off training challenges to them and go, okay, we need to do this. We need to move this animal in, say, a month's time. You need to work on crate training. And quite often it'll be, I'll go down and I'll do kind of the first session with them. I'll answer any questions they've got, and then they'll kind of run with it from there, which is quite nice to see.
Thanks, Kristen. I really enjoyed that. Does anyone have any more questions for Kristen, or shall we switch over to Dean? Okay, looks good. Let's go, Dean, if you're ready. Thanks, Kristen.
I am good to go. I am just sharing my screen. Did that work?
Yes, it's up and working.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kristen. That was awesome. I've just got a little bit of an intro into how we started our porcupine training program. We were relatively new. We've had our 2 females for only a few years now. And similarly, they were initially on our carnivore team as they cohab with meerkats. And then we did a little reshuffle, and meerkats and by default porcupine came over to our training and interactive team, where we kind of got to have a look at unleashing the power of porcupines, which is very surprising to say the least. I think they're one of my all-time favorite species to train, because they've done nothing but surprise me with what they're capable of. Once you get past, like Kristen said, once you get past that tough, spiky outer shell that they love to put on, what they are capable of doing is just as much, if not more, than most other species, and for a few really good reasons. These are our 2 females. We don't need to dive too much into them. They're very different in personality. Muiba is very confident, and very early on when they was certainly the more shy of the two species, the two individuals. But she would gain a lot of confidence from Moiba. So kind of following whatever her older sister did, uh, is how pretty much we were able to sort of start working with her. We were given the priority behavior of hand injection from our vet. I mean, we're very lucky our vet has worked with Porcupine for many, many years in Africa. And he shared the image, or the square image there with us, and said, you know, Porcupine have incredibly sensitive skin. And quite often in the past, when they were pole injected, or which is mostly how they were knocked out, for quite some time they would have to attempt to treat abscesses or other issues from that side. It wasn't always that easy. And again, manual restraint is not really a thing with Porcupine. So, well, it is, but it doesn't last long and it hurts a lot. So that was our main goal. Our main priority was to train voluntary hand injection with both females. But obviously, initially, that was quite difficult. And again, I'm not too sure. I'm assuming most people have a similar start with Porcupine that aren't hand raised. Neither girls really wanted much to do with us. They would come out, grab food from us, run back into either a box or a cave that they had. So we knew we had to really, before we could even think about a hand injection, we had a whole lot of work to do just to get them comfortable, to work outside of a cave or a box with us, really. So our first step was to look at our foundations. We wanted a really solid call over, a really solid target, and a follow, obviously a station, a hold still, and some tactile. All 6 of those behaviors needed to happen in order for us to begin hand injection training. So they didn't know any of them really. So that was kind of our start. Our lifesaver tips, looking back, the 3 things that really I find work really well for neophobic animals, especially ones. I use these tactics a lot with crate training with animals that are quite nervy. And in theory, the way that the porcupines were acting around their box or a cave was pretty much like a crate, but in opposite. So coming out with us was the scary thing. Staying inside their box or staying inside their cave was their reinforcement. That was their positive space. So we're trying to reverse that script on them, and we wanted to do that as smoothly as possible. So the 3 lifesavers that I sort of use in those situations in training is the go back in your box cue. So what we want to do there is teach them that, hey, if you're going to come outside and work with me, before you flee and run back to your safe spot, I'm going to ask you to go back to your safe spot for me. And what we do there is we actually are able to capitalize on our reinforcement, because we're using positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement at the same time. So by asking the animal to go where they want to, we're ultimately reinforcing them at the same time. So that works really well to build your relationship with any animal that's quite uncomfortable with a situation like that, by asking them to leave the area that they're not overly comfortable with to go somewhere that they are. They're going to think pretty quickly that you're a pretty decent person to be around. They know that, hey, if I do come out and stand on this station or touch this stick or whatever this weird thing is you want me to do, you are going to ask me to go back to where I really want to go as well. And they're going to build that confidence with you far quicker. Reinforcement size was another one. So initially, every time the girls came out, grabbed a piece of food, it was big enough for them to run back into the box with and really kind of work against us. So we reduced the size of the reinforcement. And again, you need to sort of measure what works for your animal here. You don't want it so small that they're not going to think it's worthwhile coming out for, but you want it so that they can eat it relatively quickly and want a second piece from you before darting back into their box. So that was another thing that worked really well in our favor. And for any tactile work with, again, any sort of neophobic animal, we have our stripper protocol. They can touch us, we can't touch them. So building that confidence early on with them, introducing the tactile, allowing them to interact and touch us first, really helps accelerate and build that trust around us being able to reach out and touch them. So I've been told that's what happens in a stripper club. I don't know myself, but it really works well with animals. So hopefully it works well there for them as well. Now this is a beautiful angle. This was pretty much every training session to start with, whether they were in this cave on habitat or in a box out the back. So this was us introducing a target to the girls wherever the hell they were in there. They had learned early on that to touch the target. This is a little bit early, a little bit later on. This is when we started to introduce our station. So again, being able to move these around the habitat was also going to help us with bringing them out into areas that we wanted to work, obviously bringing it close to where they're comfortable to start with, and building from there. This is a little bit later on where we could now move to other stations and targets around the habitat, remembering, oh, she's a bit clumsy there, remembering they wouldn't normally come much more than a body length out. So we can see here, they know that the target stick means something yummy is coming, and they had started to build that confidence in the immediate area around their safe spaces. And then from there, we were able to build confidence walking around with us, again, without constant food. They then started to learn, hey, wherever you're going is where I'd like to be. So again, this was all strengthened by that relationship. Initially, us and the outside world were the scary thing. By using those three tactics in building their confidence, we saw a massive change that all of a sudden, us and the outside world were not the scary things at all. And again, from there, we were able to start introducing a whole host of things like our voluntary ways. Again, this behavior can happen on habitat or back a house. We obviously can move that around. Then we wanted to start our medical training. Now we have a few rules that we stick by across all of our, or most of our species within the park. That again, I think is always nice rehashing on. We overtrain and underask. If we know that the injection's going to take 10 seconds, we will train it to last 30 seconds. So that on the day, when it's incredibly important, we're asking a far less criteria than what we know the animal's been trained to do. This is one way that we help set the animal up to succeed. We are always honest with them. We don't want to trickle feed them during training for an injection, especially if they're not able to eat on the day. So we make sure we follow our ABC of conditioning. We want the behavior to occur. We want the cue to occur, the behavior to occur, and then they receive reinforcement. So while they are being injected or having the needle put in, they're not being fed at the same time. They get fed once that behavior is completed. And this way, in terms of being honest with them, we're trying not to distract them while we're giving them a needle. We would like them to know basically what's about to happen, and then you get your reinforcement. We make pain predictable. So we tell the animal that we're about to poke them with a needle. Basically, we have a cue that is simply saying going in, that they know from that point they're about to feel a little pinch, and the animal's able to brace themselves in whatever way, shape, or form they choose to. They just know it's not going to be a surprise. When I'm explaining this process to new staff, I like to use the example of the haunted house. If I go into a haunted house, I'm obviously tense the entire time. I know basically what's going to happen. At some point, I'm going to get a fright or something unpleasant. When the animals are set up in a situation where they know we normally do an injection in this position, then they're going to be a little bit tense, just like I am going through a haunted house. However, prior to going to a haunted house, if somebody said to me, hey, there's somebody behind door 3 and door 6, I'm going to be far more relaxed. I'm going to brace myself at door 3, and it's going to be less of a surprise to me. I'm going to be able to brace myself and deal with that behavior prior to. So that's kind of our theory behind that with making any sort of pain predictable. We have a high ratio of good to bad. So for every time we want to hand inject an animal, we want to do at least 20 to 50 times where we do a dummy setup, so that we don't, animals are the best statisticians on earth. They've figured out exactly how many times they've done something for a particular reward, and we want to make sure that the practice runs far exceed the time that it actually hurts that little bit more. If it's not finished, don't do it. That's our golden rule of not ruining an injection. If the animal is almost there and they need one, then we're going to resort back to probably a less voluntary method, because we don't want to ruin halfway of a behavior that we've trained, one that we consider really important to do. And we have a 1-stick rule. If we've stuck and we've missed, then that is it for the day. That's the criteria we've set during training, and that's the criteria we're going to ask. And we have that for bloods as well. So I do believe you can condition that further on, but especially with animals that have just learned something, I'm hardly going to ask them, hey, in all of our practice runs, we've stabbed you once to take your blood, but on the actual day, if I miss it, I'm not going to stab you 3 times trying to get it. That's on me. You've done the behavior perfectly. You will still receive all of your reinforcement for that. So the time came for us to start our blunt needle descents. We were really happy with where the girls were at. We'd consulted with our vets as to the best positions that they would like us to sort of start conditioning the hand injection, which was front shoulder region. And again, we had a few different setups. We started outside. We then moved it to inside. So you can see there, Lauren gave the cue that some pain is about to come. Abby has the porcupine stationed on her target. Once the behavior is done, Abby bridges the behavior and then she reinforces. So all through our practice sessions, this is the same format. Again, on the day of an injection, we can't feed them. So this helps us set for that injection on the day. Of course, as much as we train it, the vet smells funny and he's scary as all hell. So we have to get the vet in for a few test runs and trials. This first one, the first video is the first time we wanted to test what would happen for an injection. So the doc was just going to inject saline. We wanted to see how we went. This was a little bit early on. As you can see, she's a little bit uncomfortable with it, but it was able to work quite smoothly. And the next one, again, on the day, the actual injection stings a lot more. So this was her first voluntary GA, her first voluntary injection for her GA. Once we mastered that, we wanted to sort of jump onto a few other things like some voluntary dental x-rays. This is Abby with her beautiful makeshift x-ray machine, including light and beep sound. So this is some very early conditioning with that, which enabled us again to get some proper x-rays done. Again, with our makeshift x-ray stand, which are 2 click-clack containers, which works beautifully. The results, we were able to get some beautiful GAs. We GA the animals once every 2 years, and we're able to do that because we can gain so many other things voluntarily from them that it really only comes to every 2 years that we need to sort of do a full GA. We've now completed 2 full GAs with them, and we are in May about to do our 3rd. So so far it's worked quite well. Each day we focus on one of our maintenance husbandry behaviors, so that we do make sure we are rotating through them, and it's not every couple of years we start up the injection training again. We do it once a week or multiple times a week. one of the things that we did notice was that Wenye's confidence skyrocketed once we started to train. Early on, there would just be days that she didn't participate at all, even when her sister was more comfortable to leave. And both of them learned an incredible amount of resilience. Resilience training is another thing that we kind of put as a high priority with our animals. We want to make sure that they aren't wrapped in cotton wool. I guess if that's the case, then that's probably a welfare concern there. So this work with the porcupines, we saw massive changes in confidence all around. One thing that came out of our last GA was a few cracked feet pads that the vet noticed. So what we wanted to do then was the doc said to us, can you find a way of checking their feet more frequently? And if we were able to put something topical or keep an eye on it. And again, outside of picking them up and cuddling them and trying to look at the bottom of their feet we don't really see too often. We toyed with the idea of building something that they could stand on that had a mirror, but I gave the option to the girls to see if they could train some foot presents. And I think out of all of my career, this is one of my favorite behaviors because they look like little ballerinas in giant tutus. But the girls did an amazing job at training some rear and front foot presents. This is still quite early on in their training, but have a look at the cutest porcupine behavior, I believe, in the history of the world. I love them. So our current completed list of behaviors, we have a recall. We can send them from A to B or ABC. Target follow station. Little health checks that we can do. We can touch their ears. We can have a good look at their eyes. We can trim their nails, look at their paws. The little foot presents, X-ray, IM injection. Even though we don't breed them just yet, we trained them for ultrasounds. And the spin behavior. The spin behavior, the girls found helped really well in just repositioning them. Sometimes when their confidence skyrocketed, they thought that they could be lap dogs and get really, really, really close to you. And sometimes you can't control the wind blowing a tree outside, which if scares a porcupine and they're really close to your lap means that you're going to die, basically. So a behavior to help us reposition them. We can cue them a spin and they will turn around, and in doing so, they end up a foot further away from you. So that behavior has been quite helpful in terms of just repositioning them. And that is it from me.
Thanks, Dean. That was fantastic. I'm wondering if you would be happy to share your videos and maybe some training plans or training steps with the greater community. We do, unfortunately, with teams, and I'm not sure why, we have problems replaying videos. It doesn't, when I've recorded sessions, sometimes the videos just don't work. So, yeah, maybe we could tee up an opportunity where you can share your videos because that's really impressive stuff.
Yeah, we can. Or we can look at. I can flick them to Beck, and she can chuck up a little blurb or chuck them on the Carney Tag Facebook page. Or yeah, either way. Teams is not my friend. I don't understand how Teams works, but yeah, and like Kristen said, the stuff that the guys do in Hamilton is just incredible. I've had the pleasure of working with Emma. Emma and I used to be roommates at SeaWorld many, many, many years ago. So I'm always bugging her about ideas. Unfortunately, New South Wales DPI won't let me take a porcupine out of its enclosure, but that's another one to work on. But yes, some of the stuff that Emma and the team have done at Hamilton is just incredible. And again, just further shows what a potentially in the past an underestimated value that training does have with porcupine.
Well, I think everyone would be really keen to get more of those videos up and happening. Really interesting presentation from both of you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Dean. Does anyone have any questions for either of these guys before we finish up? No, well, I think that's it for us, guys. Once again, really appreciate your time. I found it totally a great presentation from both of you, and I've learnt lots about porcupines. It makes me want to get porcupines back in at Melbourne Zoo again, because they are a cool little species, and I think the more information we have about them, the better they'll captive lives will be.
I think too, like Kristen had some great um, notes there on the fact that our husbandry manuals or what we know husbandry wise is so outdated. I did a big overhaul recently with capybara and again found the same thing. It's we've learned so much more. I mean, capybara again have been another species that blew my mind in terms of how complex they can actually be. I think sometimes there's a hesitation of species like porcupine because they don't always display as well, or difficulties around capture and restraint, or all of those sorts of things. So I think that getting more of this sort of information out there, again, will help people maybe go, or maybe it is a species that we could invest in and have more of in more facilities, because there are better ways that we can work with them now that maybe historically wasn't done.
I think and I'm going to put you both on the spot now. I think when we think of traditional husbandry manuals or care manuals, whichever you want to call them, it seems like such a big task to do one. However, I think you could start with chapters, like so that between the two of you, if one of you could say, well, I'm going to write about Kristen, I'm going to write about breeding, reproduction side and things that we've learnt and exhibits set up to help accommodate that. And then Dean, you do something on, training porcupines and the intensities and things like that. Slowly but surely we start to all collectively build up our knowledge, skills, and awareness of any species. So I really encourage you guys who are doing the work right now, if you can actually start to think about, well, I'm not going to write a whole husbandry manual here, but I can write a chapter, and pick a chapter and just start chipping away at it, because I find that everybody loves these kind of drop-ins, and that we all learn so much from them. So just having another set of information out there would be fantastic if you guys would be up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a brilliant idea, and it does take the sort of daunting process away a little bit. Yeah, I'm keen. The more, the merrier.
Well, please reach out,
Yeah, I
and
guess I've
we can do something. Kristen?
I think I've got kind of a basic. There will definitely be a few people out in the region that are on my little porcupine kind of care manual that I've seen out with individuals that we've moved on. So that's definitely something we've got to on. Most of the talk today is stuff that is written into that, just in a more basic format.
Well, and again, you look, I'm happy to put things together. If you've got the information, I can put the formatting down, if that makes life easier for either of you. But I think, give it a crack, see how you go, and let me know if there's any way that we can help, because information shared is information learnt. So let's keep passing that on. And once again, guys, thank you so much for your talks. It was really good. All right. Well,